Charles, what do you think of the president's personal statements about what he said there on the Trayvon Martin case?
Well, I think that all of us as black men have been put in awkward situations. We've all been followed through stores. Some women do grab the purses a little tighter when you walk up in the elevator next to them. And that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. And this whole Trayvon Martin thing, I feel bad for his mom and dad. But I hope what will come out of this is open dialogue. One of the problems with race, Erin, is we never discuss race until something bad happened. And then what happens is everybody protects their own tribe. You know, everybody says, I'm going to defend my tribe, whether they're white, black, Jewish, Hispanic. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. We have this mentality we all want to protect our tribe. But listen, we got to start talking about race when everything is calm. We can't go into a dialogue when everybody is mad because, like I say, everybody protect their own tribe, but also there's anger. We need to sit back and say, let's have an open and frank conversation about race. That's what we really need to do.
And you know, to your...
And let me make this other point. And I want to make this one point. You know, when people talk about race, they always want to act like it's only white people who are racist. Listen, there are black people who are racist also. Don't ever get that. That's one thing I always want to talk about. And I consider racism the greatest cancer of my lifetime. Unfortunately, to some people, I'm always going to be black. But the one thing I learned growing up in Alabama was my grandmother, who's the greatest person who ever lived in my life, said to me, you judge everybody by their own individual merits because there are just as many black idiots as white idiots.
Words of wisdom and so clear. But let me just ask you, because as you say, a lot of people are angry, right? And you're talking about the need for a conversation about race, and you're saying that in a very thoughtful way. But you also agree with the verdict, right? The verdict in the Zimmerman trial.
Yes, I think that George Zimmerman, Mr. Zimmerman was racial profiling Trayvon Martin. He was wrong in that. I think he was over-aggressive. But I think at some point they switched places and Mr. Martin became aggressive. And look, I watch CNN every day. I pay close attention to the trial. I don't go by sound bites and all this other stuff that you hear on the side. I paid very close attention to the trial. But just on the evidence alone, I think the verdict was fair. Just on the evidence, not he was wrong for racial profiling Trayvon Martin. He was wrong for following Trayvon Martin. Well, let me tell you something. Just on the evidence alone, I thought that the verdict was fair.
And let me ask you about that, because, you know, the juror, I mean, you know, you saw her on CNN, sorry, you know, she said race never came up in the jury's deliberations. Now, you know, I got to emphasize, that's one juror. As you know, the other jurors have distanced themselves from her more generally, but that's what she's saying happened in that sequestered jury. But as you know, people like Al Sharpton are saying the verdict was an atrocity. They're using words like that. Do you think race played a role in the decision? I mean, there are those who say, well, look, this was a, you know, a 6-person jury. 5 of them were white. 1 of them was black and Hispanic, and they're now saying that race played a role in the verdict. But you're sitting here on the show as a black man saying, well, I think it was the right verdict.
Well, I think race played a factor in Mr. Zimmerman's mind. But as far as just the evidence, I agree with the verdict on just the evidence alone. At some point, Trayvon Martin started punching on Mr. Zimmerman, and sadly, he shot him. But just on the evidence alone, I can't disagree with the verdict.
And let me ask you about one of the guests earlier this week. She came on the show and she said something that, well, it really got me thinking. And given what you're talking about profiling, I wanted to ask you about it. You know, she said subconscious profiling, which I think if we can be honest, we all do, right? In some way, shape, or form, whether it's racial or gender. I mean, you know, human beings profile human beings. But she was talking about this case and saying, well, look, if there was subconscious profiling going on, which she believed there was, that was essentially an act of hate crime, which, of course, would hit then the federal level, right? The Department of Justice level for a prosecution. But do you agree with that concept that subconscious profiling is an act of hate crime?
I don't think the Justice Department should get involved in this. Listen, just because you don't agree with a verdict, you can't change the rules. You can't change the rules because you disagree with a verdict. You know, Erin, one of the biggest problems we have in this country is we're still segregated.
Yeah.
The black people live on one side of town. The white people live on one side of town. The rich people live on a whole other area. They live in the suburbs. So our racial interaction doesn't happen as much as we need it to happen. You might see somebody at work, but you go back to your neighborhood during the day. You know, listen, I live in a rich neighborhood. I'm probably the only black guy there. That's sad, but that's part of it. But that's just the way. We all have psychological warts, as I like to call it.
We do.
You know, we do. We all have psychological warts because most people's impressions of they see black men on television committing crimes. So those people who live in the suburbs or they live on the white side of town, that does cloud their judgment.
So you said yesterday in an interview something that I have to ask you before you go. You said the media doesn't have clean hands. Those were your words. You've been watching it closely.
Yes.
And please, don't mince words. You know, you're on CNN, but criticize CNN if that's what you want to do. What did you mean when you said that?
Well, race to me is the perfect storm for the media. They love racial animosity. The media loves, first of all, they love anything that's controversial. But race is the perfect storm for them. To get a white guy and a black guy on television yelling at each other every night, one for the defense, one for the prosecution. Television, they're riding this Trayvon Martin thing, and it's sad because a kid lost his life, but the media, they love controversy. And the greatest controversy in this country is racism, sadly.
Well, I think it's a fair criticism, and one, you know, everyone sitting where I'm sitting needs to really think about. So it's a fair point. All right, good to talk to you. Charles Barkley there.
Thank you very much.